Welcome, Ms. Francis here. Thank you for coming back to my channel. If this is your first time here, I bid thee welcome. There is a subscribe button below if you would like to help support my channel by subscribing. Also a bell to be notified as to when I upload more content. I'm coming to you from Ghana country, and as such I acknowledge the Ghana people of the Adelaide Plains as being the traditional custodians of this land upon which I reside. So this video, I don't know if it's sort of magical, it's sort of metaphysical, it's all of the above sort of thing. And what I'm wanting to sort of talk about is the Hermetic Law of Polarity. Largely because there is so much negativity around today, even within, so we say, certain pockets of the magical or occult communities. And as such, I have been sort of thinking about the Hermetic Principles, of which there are 7. And these principles sort of, if you're not aware, sort of came to light turn of the last century, the early 19th century, through the writings of a book. I've got one version here, the Kabbalion, that was said to be written by 3 mysterious initiates. The principles themselves are believed to be based on other philosophies. Some stories even say that they stem back to a rather mystical character, Hermes Trismegistus. And you can do a Google search to learn more about them, but I want to sort of focus on one of these principles in particular, because it is in my conscious awareness at the moment. And it's not just within the magical occult communities, we're seeing it in our world. And that is this law of polarities. So what I would like to do, and I'm just going to go off on a little bit of sort of a magical bent, sort of explaining this. I'm just going to share my screen because I do have a few pictures just to sort of highlight what I'm talking about. And you may be familiar with this card. It's from the Rider-Waite Tarot deck, and it is that of the High Priestess. So within, say, ceremonial high magic, there is this glyph that is referred to as the Tree of Life. And I'll bring it up. Here's just one version of it that I found on the internet. I don't know who the author is. And it shows these 2 pillars. There's this white one here, and what is a black one. And these are the 2 that we see either side of the High Priestess on the tarot card. And these 2 pillars are said to be the sort of foundation. They're called Bozaz, or Bozaz, which is the black pillar, which is severity, and Joachim, which is the white pillar, which represents mercy on the Tree of Life. And together they symbolize sort of dualistic forces in the universe, as well as sort of being used as guiding points when it comes to, especially with magical circles, evoking power. And as I said, in the tarot card, we can actually see the High Priestess sitting between the 2 of them, and she is in the middle. And it is said that these 2 pillars represent the twin pillars that were said to have stood before the Temple of Solomon. And as such, there's references to them in the Hebrew Bible, especially when it comes to, or came to, the construction of the temple. These 2 pillars are described in the first book of Kings and also the second book of Chronicles, and were said to serve as symbols of divine establishment and strengthen not only the temple, but also the divine kingdom, with Joachim, the white pillar, meaning he will establish, and Bozaz meaning in strength. So if we sort of follow the train of events within Freemasonry, these 2 pillars also mark the entrance to the lodge and represents the threshold between the mundane and the divine. So if you really want to get sort of Kabbalistically, looking at this glyph here, known as the Tree of Life, found within the Kabbalah, as I said, Bozaz represents severity, It also represents judgment, restriction, discipline. And these are sort of like the underpinning essences, I guess, of the saffron, or the spheres which form that pillar. On the other side, we've got Joachim, which is the pillar of mercy, starting off with Chesed at the top, and it represents love, expansion, benevolence in relation to the saffron, which are in this pillar. What is important, and this is what we see with the high priestess on the left, is in the middle. There is another sort of pillar, and it's not sort of in the physical form like Boaz and Joachim. It's sort of on an energetic, mystical, divine level, like an inner level, while the other two pillars are more sort of external. And this is what's called the middle pillar. And this balances these two opposing forces, and it represents harmony and also the path of, or to a spiritual ascent, which is up the top. It also represents and embraces the balance between severity and mercy. And it is this balance that seems to be missing when we focus on duality or separation, as opposed to the need for balancing these two energies or viewpoints. And I guess the principle of polarity can be misinterpreted as being very dualistic in nature, where these two pillars are actually sort of separate. But what they also represent here is the law of polarity that goes beyond sort of dualistic interpretation. So this is what I'm wanting to sort of explain here in this video. Before we do, just returning back to the tree of life, it's often seen as a blueprint of the nature of reality. And when we look at these two pillars, we can see the duality that is built into it, and which is also into the very fabric of our reality. After all, we do sort of work very dualistically. We have in, out, we have on, off, male, female, black, white, negative, positive, day, night, etc., etc. But when we look at these two seemingly dualistic aspects, these things are not actually all that separate from each other. They are, if we want to sort of expand a little bit more, really one of the same, except for they are on opposites polarity, almost like opposite poles of the nexus, so to speak. If we think of sort of the north and south pole of our planet, they are not really separate entities of themselves. They are just extreme points on the axis that makes up our planet, the top part and the bottommost part. And when it comes to the law of polarity, the Kabbalion sort of states that everything is dual. Everything has poles. Everything has its pair of opposites, like and unlike. These opposites are identical in nature, but different in degree. And that's the key point. They are different in degree. Extremes meet. All truths are half-truth. All paradoxes may be reconciled. So all truths are half-truths, because we're only seeing one side to the coin. And the world in which we live in tends to be very focused on there being one absolute truth. And I recall, I think it was George W. Bush back in the early 90s, when he talked about his axis of evil after September 11th. It was in the 90s. And he sort of made a declaration to the world, or the Western world in particular, that we were either with him or against him. In other words, whether we were with the US or if we were against the US in retaliation, we were enhancing evil. Now, if politics is not your thing, we can look to sort of pop culture, in particular Star Wars, and Ben Kenobi tells Luke Skywalker that one day Luke will learn that there are many truths that we sort of cling onto solely due to our own perspective or point of view. And this isn't a cop-out, this is a simple truth. And it's one that even today can be found not only in esoteric teachings, but also in, say, modern life coaching, such as neuro-linguistic programming, NLP, where those who have done NLP are taught that our perceptions shape our reality. It also means that as a whole, everyone, including myself, we're all polarized. And this is something that we are seeing more evidently within politics, religions, sporting arenas, where there is this almost need to be on one side or the other. Where I live, we have two sporting teams in Australian rules football, AFL, Australian Football League. And what often newcomers get asked is, who do you barrack for, the Crows or Port Power? As if there's no alternative. And that always sort of amuses me. I guess these days amusement is I don't care. Because it's sort of assuming that everybody, A, follows this code, and B, will show their loyalties to local teams. But that sort of gives an example as to how polarized we are in our world. Now, circling back to this Tree of Life glyph, one thing that is taught when you begin to study ceremonial high magic is what's known as the middle pillar ritual. And this ritual focuses on the central points, aspects of sapphire, that are in the middle of this glyph. And the reason why this is one of the first rituals that you are taught is because this ritual in itself is designed to balance those opposing forces of severity and mercy that tend to polarize us. And when we become more balanced, we also become more grounded, more centered. And there are other side effects, such as when we're not so polarized, we are not so inspired or driven or automatically reacting to things. This is because we are becoming more and more depolarized within our own self, within our own environment, within our own world. And I feel it's becoming increasingly important to do some sort of, even if you're not interested in magic or the occult, some sort of balancing. I see the middle pillar also similar to, say, working on the chakras, the energy centers, keeping those sort of chakra points aligned, or any other form of grounding and centering that you feel comfortable doing. Because the world around us is becoming increasingly more polarized. And what people don't really understand or seem to realize is that when you are extremely polarized, you are actually extremely controlled. And this sort of, I don't know, sort of makes me smile a little bit, especially when we have these self-professed freedom fighters that largely emerged out of COVID, because they are extremely polarized. And if we're looking at the law of polarity, how what we may see as polarizations are actually the same thing, then they're big corporate evil, the big pharma, the government, the 1% that has everything, is really a reflection of their own selves, because everything is the same, just difference is in degrees. And again, polarization is having one or the other, only 2 points of view. So it is this basically this idea of us versus them, polarization. It is the framework of the tree of life, which I said is also the blueprint of our reality. And the tree of life is one of the main tools, so to speak, in the toolbox of any competent magical practitioner, but is the realization and working with it, working through it. And I guess I should also point out that this polarization is not necessarily a bad thing, because if you took away polarization, really, in all honesty, life wouldn't exist. And this is because if you consider the tree of life almost like batteries to, or terminals to a battery, we need to have negative and positive, one or the other, to enable the flow of energy or electricity to occur. And if we didn't have these two terminals, these two polarities, there would actually be nothing. In other words, everything would stop. So we need to have this equal and opposite force to enable that there is movement. And even if we come back to our own sort of physical selves, the human body is electromagnetic in nature. We have these polarities within us. But the important thing, and this is what I'm trying to get at, we need to sort of be like the high priestess. We need to understand the importance of the middle pillar or other similar systems within various other religious, spiritual, metaphysical teachings, and that is to keep these forces in balance. And that is the key word. So when we look at, say, the Tree of Life glyph and how it's representing not only duality, it can also be perceived, as I said, as a battery terminal with the electric current for the life flow. We need to then connect in and do a ritual. As I said, in particular, one that I do is the middle pillar ritual, where we take the energy from Godhead, from Kether. If I go back, we can see it from Kether, from Source, the divine, and we bring it all the way down through our body to Malkuth, to earth it into our physical reality. And when we earth this energy, and we don't have to do what, and I'll just go back again, in some traditions, we're doing what's called like the lightning flash. We don't need to do that. We just need to focus on the middle pillar. And it's when we earth, ground this energy, that we begin to depolarize ourselves. And just sort of highlighting this too, what's interesting is that grounding does occur naturally all around us. However, these days, many of our shoes are made from leather, made from with rubber soles. And it is this rubber that's actually preventing us from grounding. Added to that, we also tend to live more inside. Sort of our focus is more on our devices, and we also have concrete covering our ground. We live in a very sort of like artificial world with our air conditioning and go from air-conditioned cars to air-conditioned buildings, that we're not out in true nature. So we're not able to allow nature to help balance and ground us. What we're doing effectively is limiting our own connection to the earth. And when we look at the energetics of what we're doing, we are effectively reducing our ability to ground and hence heightening our ability to overreact to things, especially as we become more and more polarized. So good sort of leadway from this is outside. Even if it's the middle of winter, take off your shoes, ground yourself, bring yourself back into balance, even if it's just for a few minutes of the day. Just going to now sort of stop the screen share. So the 7 Hermetic Principles are actually the key to everything. And whether you do magic or not, everything actually comes back to them. And for some people, the Law of Polarity is, I guess it's just one of these more important principles. When we are polarized, we tend to see everything, as I said, as one thing or the other, as black or white, instead of seeing all the different gradients of color in between, or as the Balian says, all the different degrees. While the objective may be to depolarize yourself, this does not necessarily mean to remove yourself from the poles. Again, if you did that, you would be removing yourself effectively from life force. And because when you do that, the end result is death. You won't exist. What is actually implied is the balancing of these forces between the poles. When this occurs, what's created is something really unique in its own self. And from a more sort of like the personal level, when you do this to yourself, you will find that the more that you become balanced, shift sort of happens, especially if you have a tendency to overreact or not with things. And especially in today's world where it's so easy to get involved into online attacks and harassments, not to mention, I guess, misinformation, misinterpretations. All of this that we're seeing is coming from a place of imbalance. And as I did mention too earlier, the more that people are pitted against each other, they are controlled. And they are controlled because they're not able to think, see, put themselves into the place of the other. And when you can't do that, then you can't compromise. And again, we see this constantly played out in the world around us. This is why it is also increasingly important to do whatever resonates with you to bring yourself back into balance. So a good example is, say, if you come across a posting of someone that you dislike, instead of reacting to that post, here's a thing, just maybe ask yourself, why do you care? What does that post or that person mean to you in order for you to care? And if you do react to their post, especially if you respond to it, it means you actually care. You're caring what this person thinks. This could be a little bit difficult to understand, but even if you really violently dislike the person, it's almost like there is a threat. What? And then ask yourself, what sort of threat do they have to you? They are also seeming to have a degree of power over you. And even if you say, oh, no, they don't, they do. especially energetically, because this is why you are getting upset. You are getting all worked up. You're finding this need to retaliate, to respond. So I'm just going to repeat that last bit. What power does this other person, this other thing, have over you to enable you to get you so worked up that regardless of what they say or do, especially on social media, you need to respond? Because what you're actually doing is giving away your own power, your own energy, enabling yourself to be unbalanced. And as I said at the beginning, when you return to this polarized state of one or the other, this enables you to be controlled and also manipulated, even if the other person doesn't realize what they are doing. And let's face it, polarized people, especially at the far extremes, can be like children. You can't reason with them. They see everything black and white. And again, we saw this coming out or surrounding the pandemic, the COVID, people before against vaccinations or for vaccinations. You couldn't argue with either side. You couldn't hold deeper conversations with people. Especially the more polarized they are, we see it in politics. Not so much Australian politics, especially in American politics, we see that. For the outside world, we see that. Very polarized. And when people are that extreme, they only see the world in two ways: their way or what's not their way. And as I said, depending on how polarized they are, more often than not, they are really not interested in meeting you or anyone else halfway. So why bother? Because you cannot change the mind of a polarized person, just as if you were polarized yourself. You won't allow your own mind to be changed either. And then coming back to social media, why then get into an online battle when there's really no solution? What you should be doing is working on balancing yourself. And you do that by understanding why there is so much polarization in the world around you, why you are wanting to react in certain ways. And the more that you understand just how polarized our world is, the more you begin to understand that there are people out there, I guess without sort of sounding a little bit too conspiracy theory sort of rabbit holes to dive down, you begin to understand too that there are people out there, or institutions or organizations or groups, who know all about polarization, understand the law of polarity, and their purpose is really to keep this polarization going. Because, as I said, this is an easy way to control, to manipulate people when people are divided. And we see this in our media more so of late, not only because of clickbait materials and how they get their, I don't know, get seen. And this is a social media thing as well. Like, it sort of like prompts the logarithms, but often it's the media who is sort of stirring up a hornet's nest. The media is to get the likes, to get the subscriptions, to get the attention, is causing this polarization. Again, it's easier to control and manipulate people, especially when people with energy. And when you think about it, it all comes down to energy. This is something that I keep talking about on this channel. When people are energetically scattered, at war with each other, with their own selves, they are not able to come back to this place of balance and clarity. The more balanced we become, the less we need to react to a differing opinion. The less we need to get energetically involved, or is it entanglement? We limit our sort of care factor. It doesn't necessarily mean that we become ignorant or arrogant, unsympathetic, uncompassionate. It just means that we become more consciously aware and therefore more responsible as to where and how we submit our energy, our attention, and really our own power. And sometimes it's also better to be silent, to not say a thing, to not give any reaction, to just let the negative people do whatever they want to do, the polarized people do what they want to do. And that can take a little bit of guarding of their own selves, because if we hear people saying negative things about ourselves or spreading rumors or lies, of course, some of us would want to get on our sort of like, we feel there's the need to sort of defend ourselves. But even doing that, sometimes what we are doing is giving away our energy, because we're falling into that online battle of the polarities, of trying to convince someone, or people that maybe we really don't care about, convince them that we are not what this person says, as opposed to letting them find out for themselves. And this is something that I see often, increasingly, again on social media. I don't know about social media at times, but especially within magical, occult, witchcraft circles too. There is this lack of silence. How I was taught silence was one of what's known as the 4 powers of the Sphinx. To know, to will, to dare, to keep silent. But silence isn't nothing. This is what people don't understand. Silence is to sound what empty space is to form. So if you draw a picture, a symbol, a sigil even, it's surrounded by space, and it is that empty space that gives it form. This is because the sigil, symbol, the picture, wouldn't actually exist if there was no space. Sometimes we just need to let people do their thing, especially if they are polarized, and focus on us becoming more and more balanced. So if you know the middle pillar, and I'll just bring it up again, this is one of the foundational rituals within ceremonial or high magic to focus on. As I said, working on your chakras, which follow the central pillar of grounding yourself, getting out in nature, taking your shoes off, even if it is for a brief period of time in winter, turning off your devices, getting back into nature, even making a conscious effort as to what material is the soles of your shoes made out of. But also, when it comes to dealing with polarity or polarized people, and we are all polarized, sometimes it's best to come back to that place of silence. After all, we have 2 ears and 1 tongue. And I think that needs to say no more.